Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to unveil my 6 titles for my book club. Socks has just whizzed off. He's meant to be helping me because it's my book club, but it's also Burn & Socks' book club. Although, I was going to say none of these have got a cat involved, but I've just seen there is a cat in one of the books. Anyway, over the past week or so, I hatched this plan to... some of you might have seen this, to have a book club of my own for the summer that wasn't Book Talk or Instabook, and it wasn't Waterstones, and it wasn't Richard and Judy, it wasn't any number of the film stars and various famous nitwits who have book clubs where they suggest things that are new out and bright and shiny. This isn't like that. This is a book club that consists of books which I've read at some point. Books that meant something to me in previous summers. I went back through my reading journals and plucked out a number of things. And then in some of the videos that I did in the last week or so, I read some chunks of them at random to bring back the memory of them for myself and to see what would be a good set of 6, I decided in the end would make a good number for a book club. My idea is to hold them up and tell you about them and make you go out and maybe look for them in secondhand shops. Maybe some of them are still in print. I think, looking at them, 2, 3, half of them might be still in print, in the UK anyway. But it's a chance to go on a book hunt, either online or in shops, which is one of the best things to do. Sometimes I think this stuff comes too easy. One of the things they've done to destroy publishing and the kind of bookish world, in some ways, is to make things too easy. When they started discounting books and selling them in supermarkets and just selling about 15 different titles or whatever it is, and they cut down the choices that the average reader has because these kind of obvious books are pushed in our faces all the time. And we are made to want obvious things, which is always a bad idea. We should not look, we should look beyond the obvious. All the time, actually. That's a really, it's a good piece of advice for anything, not just books. Look beyond the obvious. And if somebody's giving you something obvious, question why. I'm going to give you things that really aren't obvious. Hopefully, with these 6 books. I'm going to go through them. These are the ones that leapt out of the however many it was that I talked about in the last week or so. Firstly, a novel from the 90s. Jane Gardam, The Queen of the Tambourine. Was it the 90s? Very early in the 90s. This is a novel told in letters, and about somebody writing letters to her neighbour, her slightly recalcitrant neighbour down the street. And it becomes wilder and stranger as it goes on. It must be almost 30 years since I read this, so a lot of the details elude me, and I am looking past the slightly dull cover. It is the kind of book that would turn up in a second-hand bookshop and you would shunt aside, unless you knew the name Jane Gardam and knew that she writes slightly spiky, slightly feminist, magical realist short stories. I've read all sorts of things by her over the years. There's a novella about the Green Man that came out at some point in the 90s that's very good. Anyway, so this was something I was keen to revisit. So that's The Queen of the Tambourine. And then a novella. Lots of these books are quite slim, as you'll see, and that was a determined thing as well, because there's this vogue I've noticed on YouTube for the summer reads that people are suggesting and the summer book challenges that they're suggesting to read very long novels, which is nice. There's nothing wrong with long novels. I'm reading a very long novel myself at the moment, but for this I wanted to have quite slim books to tempt people. Look at that fox. This is a book about puppets. Love of 7 Dolls by Paul Gallico from the 1950s, I think. I'm not sure if this is in print, but copies will be will be easy to find, I think, if you hunt around. In Paris, in the spring of our times, a young girl was about to throw herself in the Seine. It begins with a girl who is rescued by a puppet master, and he has a bunch of dolls that speak to her. And he has ulterior motives. The puppets seem to have an individual, separate life to him, and it's a kind of magical realist fable, is what it is. And I remember it being wonderful. I really like Paul Gallico as an author. And he should come back. They've recently filmed Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris, one of his wonderful novels of the 50s. So maybe the time is right for Gallico to make a comeback. Then a book about reading, The Rights of the Reader by Daniel Pennac. I love this blurb on the back, it's quite simple. The rights of the reader, it's a kind of manifesto for reading. The right not to read, the right to skip, the right not to finish a book, the right to read it again, the right to read anything, the right to mistake a book for real life, the right to read anywhere, the right to dip in, the right to read out loud, and the right to be quiet. That's all you need to know about the kind of book this is. I found it very inspiring when I read it, whenever that was, in early 2000s. And this edition, is illustrated by Quentin Blake, which is nice. He's always worth looking at. Right, and then Half Magic, Edward Eager, a kid's book. There has to be a magical kid's book as part of a summer book club, a summer read. And look, it's an old library copy with all the little tickets inside, which to me is still magical. This is from the 50s again. And it's a proper summer holiday read. How It Began, chapter 1 is called. It began one day in summer, about 30 years ago, and it happened to 4 children in an American city called Toledo. And it's 4 kids who want to have adventures in the same way that the children in Edith Nesbit's books have adventures. And so they do. That's basically it. And look, there is a cat. So Socks needn't have gone off in a sulk. And this should be findable as well. I'm sure it came out as a puffin at some point. I think that's how I originally read it. Another novel, The Hour Between by Sebastian Stuart, from not so long ago. It's a kind of shimmering and beautiful novel. It's also raucously funny, as I remember. 2009. I really liked it. And I must have read it maybe in about 2009-10 as well. So it's been a while. And I'm ready to return to it. I seem to remember it in that kind of where you have things filed away in your heads, because one of the blurbs, one of the quotes on the back mentions Holden Caulfield and Catcher in the Rye. I seem to remember this coming close to the idea of the gay Catcher in the Rye that I've always been looking for. Back in the 90s, Edmund White's A Boy's Own Story and The Beautiful Room is Empty, they came close to being a kind of gay Salinger thing for me. This came even closer. So, yeah, ready to return to this. The Hour Between by Sebastian Stuart. What I'll do is put a list underneath of all 6 titles so you can go and look for them. My final one is a book on writing. We've had a book on reading. This is a book on writing. Wild Mind by Natalie Goldberg, which I read in the 1990s. 98 in Edinburgh, I read this. And it comes from the early 90s. It's her second book about writing practice and incorporating it into your life so it becomes a way of life. She teaches courage, I would say. That's what she does. I've read all of her books so far, I believe. These are very short chapters that are almost kind of like little fables or parables about her own life. It's a very personal book. And each chapter ends with try this, and she gives you an exercise to do. To sit down and start writing. And she's very, very inspiring and useful, I think. So, a bit of strange magical realism, a bit of out and out magic and fantasy, a bit of stylish gay fiction, and some inspiring stuff about reading and writing. And I think that just about covers it. Strange magical realism and inspirational words. I will put a list underneath, and I hope that some of you will go out and look for these this summer. I love the idea of having my own book club though. And don't they look smart together? They're kind of gold and red. That wasn't on purpose. Anyway, I will say goodbye now, and see you again soon in the next episode. Goodbye.